What's the exact name of this podcast?
We are called the Transcendiots.
That's right, it's Transcendiots.
Yeah, it's like idiots and transcend.
All right, let me just
put together.
Did you hit record on that?
I think so.
All right, well, I'm gonna hit record.
Fingers crossed.
All right, well, here we go.
Well, cheers.
Okay, so here we are.
First podcast
ever
of the Transcendiots.
That's right. So maybe you might want to explain like what the heck what that means. For
Who knows what that means, honestly. I'm a transcendiot. It goes over my head.
Okay.
You might know. What do you think it means?
I think it probably means that we're going to be talking about some pretty deep stuff, but yet I think we both have an attitude of being humble and acknowledging that we don't know everything.
That's definitely, that last part is definitely true.
Yeah, and I think there's probably going to be, people might leave comments calling us idiots. So it's very possible.
Be great.
We're preempting. Right?
Oh, well, sure. I think it's awareness that we don't know a ton. And we hope to have guests on that know more than us, starting with our next video.
Right. Yeah, let's really hope that that's the case. That we can actually get these really intelligent people, educated people on the show, right?
Well, that actually kind of leads us into where we are, and we actually have a lot of opportunity for some amazing guests here at the Pacific School of Religion and the Center for Swedenborgian Studies in Berkeley, California.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. That's we're definitely in a really unique place in the world because I think not only do we have all these great academics, but we have tons of different faith traditions and spiritual groups that are just all over the place.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And I should say we're all part of a consortium called the Graduate Theological Union.
Right.
A bunch of different religions, philosophies, all under one consortium on one hill that we like to call Holy Hill. It's been pretty great. I'm actually only here for another couple months.
Right, that's right.
Finishing my Master's of Divinity.
Right.
You're in your journey as well.
Yeah. About to finish my second year. So,
congrats.
So thank you. Well, congrats to you.
Oh well.
It's been one heck of a journey, hasn't it?
Yeah, it has. It's been good.
Right. So I think there's a lot of different directions we can go in this particular podcast. I mean, we can certainly talk about what happens when you get phone calls during podcasts. That happens sometimes.
Oh yeah, I should probably silent my phone, which is actually this camera.
So Cory's about to get up and do this.
Ooh.
And he's gonna.
I turn on the light.
Yeah.
Maybe that's not a bad
It might not be a bad thing. I don't know if it's really affecting very much. But this is what it's like the first episode. You're gonna see different things that happen.
I think it's good to learn as you go. I mean, you want to prepare. Mm-hmm. But a lot of times we get bogged down in, I already have to be in my A game.
Oh, yeah.
And I haven't even done it once, right?
No. Totally not necessary to be on any sort of A game. Mm. But, I think that the purpose of this podcast really is just to talk about, what does it mean to be spiritual people, I guess. That's I think one thing that we talked about, that it's, what does that even mean and how do people experience spirituality here in the 21st century? Maybe not necessarily only here in Berkeley, but just in general.
And they may not call it spirituality, it could just be living.
Yeah.
That's another interesting thing, how, we all have different words for similar things, mm-hmm. and we discount some ideas over others, but I think there's a lot of common ground once we get past that.
Right, exactly. So we have a couple ideas that we talked about that we could go into. It seems like you and I both have an interest in really analyzing film and books and really trying to tease out what might be the philosophical or political or spiritual messages that come out of these things in popular culture right now.
Yeah.
We have creative geniuses that, whether they know it or not, portray things, plot and characters that at least we think have some sort of significance and meaning, right?
Yeah, definitely. And clearly, the wider culture does too, because we we talk about these things all day,
right,
in social media.
That's right.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking maybe a good place to start, since this is something. Well, I mean, there are two movies we talked about before we went live, and I think there are two movies right now that like everyone right now is talking about, and I see no reason why we shouldn't talk about them. But
Phantom Thread,
right?
It was good. But...
That's right. That's right. Let's talk about the Murder on the Orient Express for the next hour.
Maybe.
Maybe. No, but. It's no surprise when you go online right now, the two movies, especially on YouTube, when you go on there, the two movies that are getting the most airtime and analysis is Star Wars Episode 8, The Last Jedi, and Black Panther. I've
heard of those. Yeah,
yes, right. Those two movies definitely are being talked about a lot. But I think the thing is that people people are focusing on those two films. I think largely, at least from what I can tell, totally looking at it from politics or especially politics, maybe more so with Black Panther, but also I think Star Wars is also getting some of that discussion as well.
What's the what politics around Star Wars?
Oh, well, I mean, so this is really interesting because I don't know how much of this is really legitimate, but I know that there are a few YouTube users who have pointed out that it seems that Star Wars: The Last Jedi has a little bit more overt political elements to it than the other films. So I don't know if you agree with that or if you see that, but that's certainly one complaint, is that there seems to be a very left-leaning political ideology that's been infused into the film, and some people don't seem to like that.
Sure. Well, I could see that it would be kind of guised as like a progressive message, but I think even the right, none of us are really into tyranny, although sometimes our actions, belie our words, but yeah, I could see that.
Yeah.
Just kind of a rejection of a certain approach to leadership and domination.
Yeah. Right.
Which, like you said, a lot of these stories speak to us on like that political level, the spiritual level as well, where we can kind of relate these things to our own life, whether that's how we treat other people, if we're kind of oriented towards, okay, my way or the highway, or even how we just, approach any type of affectional thing in our life. Sometimes we're not willing to reflect on ourselves, and we want to dominate and control. And in fact, that's unhealthy for all of us, not just for those being oppressed.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think that it seems like people who are really looking at The Last Jedi are the big complaints I've seen is just the way that the story is told. So you've got kind of like the storytelling aesthetics that's being critiqued pretty heavily by some. And then you also have a few of those folks then drag in the political concepts into their critique. But honestly, I think most of the videos I've seen have really been upset about the way in which the story was told.
What do you think about how the story was told?
So yeah, I went back and forth on this for a while, and on my own personal YouTube channel, I actually did a video where I actually said the people who didn't like this film were suffering from Star Wars amnesia, and I went into this whole, which we don't need to get into that, really.
I didn't see that video.
Yeah, well, I got some really.
They forgot what Star Wars was kind of about.
No, not necessarily. The thing that I thought, because some of the early critiques right off the bat seemed to me that people were pissed because there weren't enough details explained in the movie, and I was really confused by that attitude, because one thing that I love about Star Wars as a living mythology, maybe we can talk more about that concept later on, but as a living mythology, it's really interesting because it's never been the mythology has never been told by just one person, right? I mean, George Lucas was the originator. He was the guy who was kind of overseeing all the stuff that became like the comic books and the novels and the video games, and
rejecting the holiday special.
Right, exactly right. Making that very good conscious decision.
Which, if you haven't seen it, you got to check it out.
Yeah. We can compare and contrast the holiday special with The Last Jedi.
The Boba Fett was introduced in the holiday special.
That's true. That's true. See, and so there you go, right? And so then there's this real
cartoon.
That's right. So there really is this question of, how much information do you expect to be seen in the film? And then there has been this legacy of supporting material that comes out that helps explain some of the little details.
Like the novels.
Yeah, or the visual dictionaries. It's like
things.
all these different things. And so, it's just, I can see where. So I really fixated on that in this video of mine, and I basically said, look, if you forget this truth, as far as I can see it, about the way Star Wars is, how we come to appreciate it or understand the bigger picture, you're gonna run the risk of not liking this movie. Well, I can tell you that I got some really interesting feedback from people who watched that video of mine and basically said, some went so far as to say this is not what the problem is. They completely rejected my critique. I think I had one person who told me that they could see where maybe some people didn't like it for that reason, but that was not capturing the overall critique of the film.
Like why they really didn't like it.
Exactly. And I thought about that because I think I made that video after I saw it for the first time, and I've seen the movie now 3 times. The third time was with you and a few of other people we know. And that was the 3rd time that I saw it, and I have to say that now I can, after really looking at all these different critiques and analyses of the film, I think my attitude towards it is slowly changing, and I can kind of see why some of the critiques are there.
You're becoming more critical of it?
Yeah, in fact, I would go so far as to admit that when I made that first video of mine, I think I liked it 95%.
Huh.
Now I have to be honest and say that I think I liked it about 50%.
Dang, that's a big jump. What's the key critique there?
I do see the critique about the story, about the way the story is told.
Which is what?
Well, so you have I should say at this point, spoiler alert. Okay, so I feel like everybody has to do that. If you haven't seen this movie,
skip 2 minutes.
That's right. That's right.
If you haven't seen Star Wars,
if you haven't seen Star Wars: The Last Jedi, this is your last warning.
Okay.
But so the film has 3 main story arcs to it, and there's a couple things. One, there were things about this new trilogy that are different from the other 2 trilogies. One, that J.J. Abrams directed The Force Awakens, and one thing that J.J. Abrams is really good at doing, or I don't know, I should say he's really good at doing, but a style that he has in storytelling, is he asks a lot of questions. Right, so J.J. Abrams is best known for some of the newer Star Trek films, and also Lost. And if you've seen Lost, which I'm sure at some point we could have a whole episode talking about Lost.
I haven't seen Lost though.
You haven't? Okay.
Yeah, no, I should.
You have homework. So.
All right.
But J.J. Abrams is really good at basically driving a plot by asking tons of questions. So what he'll do is he'll say, all right, let me propose these 5 or 6 mysteries, and then the plot rides on either answering some of those questions or going through several seasons with just asking more and more questions. And that's one way he tells the story. Go ahead.
That's what he did with Force Awakens, that he asked.
Oh, well, he asked a good...
He did he inserted some mystery there. Snoke,
Who's
Rey's
Snoke?
Parents.
Yes.
Right. What's going on with, Luke Skywalker.
Right. Where is he? Why did he go into exile? And
why are the Han Solo scenes on the ship so terribly done? No, this is my opinion. Sorry.
Right. Or to ask the question how did Ben Solo get turned to the dark side?
Yeah.
How did Maz Kanata get Luke's lightsaber, the blue one? Right.
Yeah, but you got to be really into the details.
Well, yeah.
But you're right. Yeah, all that stuff.
But here's the thing, and I agree. Now, normally, and this is something that I was really reflecting on, since seeing it for the first time, seeing it 2 subsequent times, and now arriving at this point, the thing is that if you compare it quickly, and I'll do this as quick as possible, if you compare this film to Phantom Menace and to A New Hope, the first of the 2 other trilogies, what you find is that there's not a lot of these mysteries that occur, right? When you finish A New Hope, there are probably the only questions you have are, what's the Clone Wars? Because Obi-Wan tells Luke, oh yeah, I fought in the Clone Wars with your father, right? And for decades, people are like, what the hell is the Clone Wars, right? All you knew is that it was just this war, right? And that was it. There was no details. Like, I guess you could ask a question like, maybe I want to know more about what the Jedi are, what the Force is, or who Vader is. But
what's going to happen next?
Right, but it was very contained, and that was purposeful, to be fair, because George Lucas thought that was going to be the only
He didn't
movie,
know,
right? Yeah. So you had to kind of put a nice bow on that, right? But here's the thing: when you watch Phantom Menace, we kind of know what's going to happen in that prequel trilogy. We know that it's going to be about how Anakin becomes Darth Vader. But when you watch Phantom Menace, really the only question you're asking, maybe by the end of that movie, is who was Darth Maul exactly? That might be like the only question you have asking. Or like, they introduce a virgin birth motif for Anakin.
So how does this translate to the critique of 8? That there are a lot of questions.
Right. So unlike these other two films, J.J. Abrams actually actively brings us to these points where there's just tons of mystery, right? So you just mentioned them. Like, really, who is Snow? Who are Rey's parents? Like, it's very obvious that should be an important plot thread because she has this vision and she is saying to like multiple characters, I want to know who my parents are. So this is like a driving thing of like, who is she? And then
which is what JJ, all those mysteries JJ established in 7.
So he establishes
them, which is a little different than
the other
1 and 4.
Right, and so to ask the question, well, should you care so much about the details? Well, maybe not, but if the mysteries are shoved in your face, you're going to start asking those questions, right?
That's a good point, actually. Yeah, right? Yeah, because there is a critique of fandom between 7 and 8 of like trying to come up with these different. We're coming up with these different theories as to each of these things.
Of course.
And you're right. It invites those questions. It wasn't just fans going crazy. It was like, this is a mystery.
Exactly.
What is it?
Exactly.
The answer.
And to be fair, in my video on my channel, I actually critique people for going in with too many expectations. Now, I can acknowledge that's an unfair. In retrospect, that's an unfair critique of people going in because if you think about it, well, why wouldn't they go in? Those questions, right?
Yeah.
So then you have to ask the question, so how does Rian Johnson in The Last Jedi deal with some of these questions?
Director,
The director of The Last Jedi.
Did he write it?
Yeah, he did.
Yeah.
And it just actually, if you want to be current with this podcast, Daisy Ridley, the actress who plays Rey,
Daisy
Ridley.
Riley?
Is it Ridley or Riley?
I think it's Riley.
Oh, whatever. Anyway, we'll just call her Rey. Right? Okay. So
how could we check that?
Yeah, you're right. Maybe you just go on the computer. But
no, I don't want to.
No. I'm just moving the mouse a little bit. But I think it's Ridley, to be honest. But whatever.
You're probably right.
We can take that on it. But the point is that the actress who plays Rey, we know her name is Daisy. So Daisy, in a tweet or in an interview, I think yesterday, March 1st, actually admitted that after J.J. Abrams wrote the script and the story for for Force Awakens, which he did in collaboration with the screenwriter who did Empire Strikes Back, whose name is escaping me, right?
Yeah.
After he did that, he actually did an outline for episodes 8 and 9, which a lot of people apparently did not know. And so there was an actual overarching vision behind how these plots were going to keep rolling, right, through episode 8 and 9. And I guess what Daisy admits is that Rian Johnson looked at the outline for episode 8 and just went, I'm just going to go with my own thing. So in other words, he trashed the outline. I think he kept some things, but overall, he trashed the outline.
He was given carte blanche, is what I read. That he could
yes, he was. But you have to think like, okay, so wow, he basically trashes that outline and then just kind of goes with what he wants to do. And we see the result with The Last Jedi, right?
Yeah.
There's something else to consider too, and we can talk about if we want. We can go.
Well, besides that next point, so how does, just in like a nutshell, what's the critique of 8?
That the storytelling sucks.
Oh,
no. Well, here's the thing. So, like, there are 3 plot threads in that movie. There's the whole Luke, Snoke, Rey, Kylo arc. Right?
Yeah.
There's like, or we call it the Force users arc. Then there's Finn and Poe, or we could just say Poe and Leia and the Resistance arc. And then there's that subplot with Finn and Rose.
Well, people critique that stuff because it doesn't actually end up doing anything.
Okay.
Right? Is that one of them?
That's one of the critiques, is that it's like it seems sort of irrelevant. Those two threads end up feeling irrelevant, especially the canto by Finn and Rose going off on their little adventure. It almost feels like it's completely just insignificant.
Which I'm sure people have plenty of retorts. What's the significance of any of this? We want to enjoy the adventure of.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. That could be a retort. I think another thing is there's not a lot of obvious development of the characters, which to be fair, this movie, if you look at the time lapse, this is another thing about this movie that's different. Number 8, that's different from the others, is if you look at the other 2 trilogies, the time skip between the first episode in the given trilogy to the next one is significant. We're talking 3+ years, right? That the characters have grown in between the films. And they show that on screen, right? They look older. The way they in the dialogue, they mention things that have happened in between the films, off camera, and we can see that their relationship has changed in some way. Look at Force Awakens and Last Jedi. It literally starts exactly where The Force Awakens left off. So literally the time skip is not really any time skip, right? It's an hour. Let's give it an hour.
Between 7 and 8.
Right.
Well, maybe that's a good thing, so Disney can't insert 7 movies in between.
maybe. It's possible, but it's also, it breaks that mold of seeing that character development suggested, right? And so that makes it different too. And so as a result, because basically what you're saying is that these 2 films are so close in time that we really won't see significant growth for the characters. Because how could you, right? How could you go from just a week's worth of adventuring and actually expect to see huge significant growth, whereas Anakin grows from being a little annoying kid in Phantom Menace to a older Padawan learner in Attack of the Clones, and obviously he's grown because, time elapsed.
But the prequels aren't the standard.
No, they're not. Nor, and I will say this, and I'm probably going to piss some people off here.
What?
I think the sequels are better than the prequels overall. I think the sequel movies are better than the prequels.
Yeah, I could totally agree.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, well, I'm at the 90% positive towards 8. I haven't been as critical, reviewing it. I haven't done as much reflection as you have on it, I think.
Right.
But I loved it, honestly.
Yeah.
I thought it was a beautiful film.
Sure.
Some of those, I'm going to answer this mystery with, something seemingly mundane. And yet the way people react to it, kind of points out that, this has a lot of meaning for them, despite them acting like it's taken away from them. So, for example, Rey's parents turning out to be nobody, right? As far as that movie says, right?
Right.
And people were upset that, we had all these theories, and it turns out that was for naught. But in actuality, that's actually a pretty, that's a heavy reveal. It's because with Star Wars, there's this tendency to connect everything to these family lines, the Skywalkers.
Sure.
The prequels are all about just family history, and there's not a lot of mystery in the prequels, which is part of the reason I think so many people don't really enjoy them as much. Mm-hmm. Now, 4 may not have had the type of mystery that J.J. Abrams included, but it had the mystery of being new, and then you don't know where this is going. I mean, we're in space. What is the Force? What are all these things?
Sure.
And I just love Kylo Ren betraying Snoke and all those.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, things like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that something can be said about the surprise twist, but I think there's this theme of disappointment, right? I mean, there are 2 themes that are summed up, or actually I should say 3 themes that are summed up by the characters in the movie. Yoda's basically saying failure is the greatest teacher. Luke says to Rey, this is not going to go the way you think. And Kylo Ren, or Ben Solo, says you have to burn down the past. Kill it if you have to become the person you are meant to be, or however that he says it, right? And
there's also the recapturing of the past.
Yes.
Despite all that, too, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So I think another thing about Rian Johnson that perhaps is different from the other films, and what makes 8 different, is that there are 2 ways, in my opinion, and I'm sure, I don't want to say these are the only 2 ways, but there are 2 ways that you can tell a story. You can either have a plot that's really, the plot is very external and on the surface. and then beneath the external plot are themes or big ideas that are kind of beneath the surface, right? So that like you're not hitting the audience over the head with your messages and themes, but the plot is being supported by these themes. In my opinion, Last Jedi reverses that. So Rian Johnson, I think, had these big messages, these big themes, which are not bad messages or bad themes. In fact, it gets us talking, right? Like about the past, future, destiny, failure, right? These are all these things that I think are really important to consider.
Yeah.
And he has the themes, in my opinion, beyond the surface, and the story is basically trying to act as the foundation for these big themes. So he kind of reverses the way that the story is told, usually at least, in the Star Wars saga.
Yeah.
And for better or for worse, I think that is, that was his decision. And I think some people were kind of like, what?
Well, I think he almost like summarizes some of the themes in moments.
Yes.
He's like, this is a theme, this is a big bad person, eventually they're going to beat him. They beat him. He's dead.
Yeah.
Here's, and then it twists some of the things, like Darth Vader actually becoming the Emperor.
Right.
In a sense, right?
Exactly.
Which is actually, I find very kind of captivating and interesting.
Oh, yeah. I personally had no problems with that. Like I said, my favorite arc was the Force user arc.
Yeah. Okay.
And so I actually don't have very many critiques of the Force. People were complaining about how Luke was portrayed. I loved the way Luke was portrayed.
Yeah, me too.
I loved Kylo Ren killing Snoke, and that, I mean, to me, that scene, and this happened in the third viewing, which I saw with you. Mm-hmm. I went into that thinking, okay, I'm just going to kind of be a sponge and just let this stuff happen, and I'm going to kind of like really feel what my reactions are to these different parts of the film. And I tell you, I still got major goosebumps when Snoke is sitting there going, and I can see him, and blah, 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 and he's not going to betray me, and then boom, right, the lightsaber, and he looks down, and then that great shot of the lights, you see it's going through.
That whole scene is so beautifully made.
Amazing. And I had goosebumps from start to finish of that sequence, and that tells you just how beautiful that scene is.
Okay, I think I'm going to jump on your bandwagon right here, because I guess your critique is mainly around those other story arcs, especially around infiltrating the gambling, whatever rich people hang out with.
Canto Bight.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of lackluster in comparison.
Yeah.
But not to totally shift gears, but what about Black Panther?
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, so here's the thing about Black Panther. If you want to compare the two films, right? First off, I loved Black Panther. In fact, I honestly don't have... I walked out of the theater not thinking, okay, I'm going to think differently about this movie in like 2 months. Like, I actually loved the whole thing from start to finish.
Yeah.
Yes, and I think the thing about this film that they did a great job of doing was this balance between... again, like, it's really difficult to have your themes, your messages, and the plot, the action, right, the narrative. It's hard sometimes to find that perfect balance. And again, I think that some directors or some authors choose which one to emphasize, right? Black Panther, I think, did a great job of actually having a pretty good balance. The story was great.
Yeah.
The messages were well represented. And there was no sacrifice. Yeah.
I have my own critique of it, but I actually love the film.
Yeah.
Go away, keep going.
No, well, I was just going to say that. Yeah. So because of that, I was kind of reflecting on it and going, okay, this overall is a great movie because of that. They actually tried to strike a really good balance with those two areas.
Yeah.
And also, I mentioned this when we were talking earlier, that I love the fact that the villain was given so much backstory. And thinking about it, the only other...
beautiful.
Yeah, I mean, I found myself kind of going, wow, they really made this villain feel human. They didn't other him, because a lot of villains are very othered, right? It's kind of like, they're just the terrorist, they're just the tyrant, they're just that... And they actually made him have like a purpose.
He was a deep character. I mean, some of his moments, like when he takes over...
Yeah.
And the camera starts kind of upside down, and the hip hop music's playing. It's really a powerful beat, at least, and it's just like a beautiful moment. Even though this is like not a good thing at all.
Right, you're kind of happy for it.
But that kind of that relates to my critique, and it's not. I haven't read a lot of reviews of it, but it's not one I've seen. And my critique is, so first of all, I love the film. I thought its messaging was on point, very relevant film. I mean, inspiring so many people in so many different positive ways.
Sure.
So I want to say that 1,000 times before I say this critique. But for me, the only Black American in the film, the only Black American character, some of the actors were American, was the villain who dies, and he's kind of gangster and he murders a lot of people.
Yeah.
I mean, that's every American film, like. So that's my critique. Is like, yes, okay, this has really positive messaging for Black people anywhere, because it's nice just to see other Black people on film, especially in such a beautiful, well done movie.
Right.
But the only Black American character, literally, that I could name, dies.
True.
And he's and also that tends to be, and I've run into, and I'm not saying, I shouldn't say tends because I haven't met a ton of Africans, but I've met Africans who have like this idea of American Black people as being too ghettoized. And it's like a term I've heard, and I've also seen that theme explored in certain like films. And so sometimes like some Africans have like a tendency to paint Black Americans as ghettoized, and the only Black American in that movie is ghettoized.
I see.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. I appreciate you sharing that thought, and I wonder. I'm curious now to know why that isn't something that people have been pointing out. Because what I heard, almost joking, and yet of course some really hypersensitive people were critiquing this, is that like the first character to die in the movie. Of course, I don't think this is true now. I actually heard someone say that the first character to die was the white actor who plays Gollum, and ironically Snoke in The Last Jedi. What's the Andy Serkis, I think is his name. And that was kind of
I saw a headline that 2 white guys in that movie are both from Lord of the Rings.
Right, so they're the Tolkien white guys.
They're the Tolkien white guys.
They're the Tolkien white guys, right? And so but I think it's interesting that people were fixated on the fact that he dies. And I mean, I guess I don't know at what point.
But does he? No.
Right. Well, who knows? Right. That should be an ongoing joke. Does Andy Serkis' characters really die when they appear to die in his films?
Okay, so he was the first one to die.
Right, and so some people were kind of like, oh, well, I think some people were kind of like pissed about that. I don't know. Really.
Why?
I'm not really sure. I just heard that, but then I also heard that it was interesting because people were like, "Wow, this is great! The first person to die in a movie is actually a white guy, right?" Because there's like this ongoing thing about, especially in horror films, unfortunately, in horror films where the Black actor is the first person to die.
Oh yeah, a lot of things
in almost all horror films.
I got really annoyed with this last season of Gotham because it kept introducing these like supporting bad characters that are Black men, and they give them like really flamboyant lines, and then the evil character that they work for ends up murdering them, like very flamboyant. That doesn't happen to any other character. It happened like 4 times in a row, and I was just like, "Oh, come on, Gotham!" Like I wanna. Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah. So,
side criticism.
Right. But it's an important one though. It's an important one, and I really appreciate your point of saying that, what does it say when the African American is the character that dies in terms of the that particular at least for a major character, which one dies, right? Mm-hmm. Who experiences the tragedy? The tragedy is the African American, not the African characters, right? Mm-hmm. I mean,
well, yeah, and then like what the outreach at the end is setting up shop in Oakland, which is just a couple miles from here,
right? Right, yeah. Well, one of the few times you will actually see Oakland, in a movie, clearly. I was kind of like when I saw the Zodiac movie and it said Vallejo, California, and I saw the movie in Vallejo, and everyone was like,
that's cool.
"Woo!" Because how often?
That's how I felt about Drag Me to Hell. I saw it in Pasadena.
Oh, nice. Yeah. So
I was like on the. I don't know if you know that movie at all.
I do.
But it's one of Sam Raimi's best horror films. At the end, like it takes place on a stop, like a metro stop.
Yeah.
And I was like just on that. In that same place. It was funny. It was cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Yeah. So what does it say then? I mean, what are your thoughts about? I mean, you raised this critique, and I'm glad you pointed it out. So what are your thoughts on the reasoning behind why does the villain have to die in this movie?
Well, the first thing I'll say is like you have to be somewhat aware of like black culture to even have that critique, because I mean most of the time we don't see black culture portrayed in media, and that's a travesty, that's a tragedy, and so that's the deep beauty of this movie, is that it was. I mean, it's such a astounding piece of art.
Sure.
Like, don't get me wrong.
Absolutely.
But you have to like know black culture for that, and we just don't as a society. But my critique is from my own experience. I'm biracial, and so I have a little bit more awareness of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I certainly did. That thought did not cross my mind when I was watching it. I actually, my thought was I didn't want the villain to die. There was a part of me that really thought that he could be saved.
Yeah, I cried at that scene.
Did you? Yeah. I mean, it hit me. I was sitting there going, well, why does he need to die? I mean, why was that decision made? I kind of wanted more of a redemption. Anyway.
Like, I'd rather die than be put in prison.
Right.
Well, and that's because this is a real criticism of our prison system.
Sure.
Like, it's not rehabilitative at all.
Right.
Rehabilitative, whatever the word is.
Right.
I mean, it's capitalistic.
Sure.
We could do so much more with our resources in terms of like really caring about the people that we lock away, and we say, oh, you're a criminal and you deserve this punishment.
Right.
That's never what it should be about.
Right.
It should be about reformation. And then just think about it. Think about all the people, who have had their lives ruined because of drugs. Whether through the drugs themselves, and then the prison system, putting them away for that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I think we could do a lot better, with that system, and then people wouldn't rather die than go to prison, right?
Right. Right. So yeah, it's a good point. And I'm just thinking, because sometimes I like to put myself just in the mind of the world of the movie or the plot, and I'm thinking, well, if he was, what would they have done with him if they could,
what? How does he know how they're going to treat them?
Are there prisons in Wakanda? And if
Yeah.
there are, I would imagine the Wakandan, based on how advanced they are compared to the rest of the world, I would imagine their prison system is sort of like I'm thinking in our world, the prison system in Norway is like the prisoners get their own key to their own cells, and they're really focusing on rehabilitation. I'm thinking, well, if Norway pulls that off in the real world, in a fictionalized country like Wakanda, which is meant to represent this advancement that could actually help improve the rest of the world.
Yeah.
I would imagine that the prison system in Wakanda is actually like really good. And so I'm just saying if they could have rehabilitated him in the Wakandan prison, maybe that would have been a major chance for reformation, as opposed to the harshness of sending him off to a prison that's in the United States, right? So
Well, yeah.
Right.
Well, and yeah, you're right. So Wakanda is like this culturally advanced, technologically advanced civilization.
Right.
So you would expect like really progressive,
I would imagine.
beautiful prison system. But they probably knew that was pretty. That's a hard nut to crack, presenting that in film. Because if he had survived and they had locked him up, I mean, maybe they probably wouldn't have to address that again.
Right.
But maybe it's just me. I would want to see it.
Yeah, well, and maybe they could have. Maybe they wouldn't have shown it on film. Yeah, go ahead and check that. Maybe they wouldn't have put it on film. But one thing that they really could have done, because I'm thinking, let's contrast this with another villain that's pretty popular right now, or at least maybe has a little bit more depth than some of the other characters, is Loki. Right?
Yeah.
Loki kind of goes through this sort of shift where it's like villain, but brother, and then he is locked up, and then so his character is never the same in every movie that he appears in, right? He kind of goes through these really nuanced changes, and yet, I mean,
he's kind of reformed
in some
a little
ways,
bit,
right? By the time you get to Thor Ragnarok, he's not he's really not like a harsh villain in Thor Ragnarok, at least from my recollection of it. I mean, I'm not recalling.
It's almost like he's reformed because audiences like him so much. It's like,
right. So that I'm thinking, well, if you can reform that villain, then why can't you reform the villain from Black Panther?
Yeah, maybe they'll revive him. Maybe it turns out he's not dead.
See.
People put him in, they dipped him back into the flour powder.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's, yeah, I do appreciate you raising that point because, yes, I mean, certainly from your experience and your background, you know, I could see where that would jump out at you, whereas I was sitting there like, that totally just didn't even come into my mind, you know, in terms of, you know, thinking, okay, well, he's dead, and thinking about, well, he's the African American character. You know, I think I kept recalling that his going far back enough, really, he was a son of a person from Wakanda, so I sort of just kind of collapsed him into
their society.
He
clearly, well, that was his whole thing. He's the outsider to them,
right?
You know, and he's been affected by the way they let him,
right?
You know, be raised in this tough environment.
Exactly.
But you know, this movie invites these types of questions,
sure.
And well, the beauty of it is that you know, it is a bunch of black faces, you know, and that's really powerful in just like a fundamental physical way, like just seeing people like you or seeing people different than you portrayed in such beautiful fashion.
Absolutely.
You know, and all the cultural implications for it. Yeah. But I love the movie.
Yeah, like I said, I absolutely loved it. And if I had, like I said, comparing it to The Last Jedi, I felt like there was no need for me to really critique the film. I actually thought it was pretty flawless overall. Yeah. I actually honestly can't think of a single thing in this movie where I sat there and kind of went, I don't think I like that. Everything actually felt really, really good overall in terms of narrative and in terms of themes being presented. You know, and I was, so it was interesting to link that to The Last Jedi in terms of how the story is told and what's the emphasis.
So that Black Panther is the clear winner of those two for you.
I think in terms of like this, you know, just the story and the way it's told, and again in balance with the themes, I think it definitely succeeds much better than Last Jedi. You know.
Yeah. Well, and so maybe for a little bit of our context, we're both here as Swedenborgians,
right.
At the Center for Swedenborgian Studies.
Correct.
And so we actually, what I love about Swedenborgianism, it's like a mystical, kind of pluralistic Christianity. There's not a lot of Christianities that you can call like pluralistic towards other religions.
Sure.
There's a lot of Christians like that, I think.
Yeah.
And so that's one thing I really enjoy. But when it comes to looking at stories, looking at arcs like in The Last Jedi and Black Panthers, in our tradition, we look at it as kind of like a meta-narrative of our own progression, how we can kind of reject some of our more evil like intentions and whatever our religion really, and kind of accept more altruistic, loving ones. And that's like a process that goes on,
right.
Our entire lives. Do you see like any type of like symbolic narratives in these flicks?
Oh yeah, I mean, I haven't really thought about. I mean, I haven't meditated that long on Black Panther, enough to be able to adequately answer that question. I mean, I know I can think of some things, but I've had more time to spend thinking about this for The Last Jedi. I do think the whole Force user arc of, essentially these themes of exile, kind of having to reform yourself, taking time, like how Luke basically becomes this hermit and separates himself from the galaxy in order to really contemplate his who he is and what his how he's supposed to proceed from where he's at in The Last Jedi, because his motives were pretty clear. He wanted to start a new Jedi Academy, and then literally that went up in flames, right? And it was a failure moment for somebody who had put a lot of energy into this becoming a Jedi Master and wanting to train a new generation.
And he kind of reflects on that motive that he had, that the whole Jedi idea, and becomes really critical of it.
Yes.
And it's like, this isn't really healthy.
Exactly. And I think that his critique of the Jedi and even the Sith, is, I think the big thing, like a big Swedenborgian thing that came up for me when I was watching the movie, was the notion of a new, we call it a new church, but it's like there are these major historical and individual developments that happen, right? So people go through a journey of transformation, and whole groups go through a journey of transformation.
Yeah.
And so two really important groups in the Star Wars saga are the light side Force users and the dark side Force users, whether we call it Jedi and Sith or whatever. And I think that Luke's point of saying that the Jedi, the attitude of the Jedi, if the Jedi die, the light dies, that's considered vanity. I think that that's a really nice theme when it comes to organized religion. I think that that's a critique of organized religion, to say that if an organized religion disappears, then you lose all of this, whatever it is.
Everyone is
just
screwed.
Lost and screwed, right?
Yeah.
And it's just obvious that that's not the case.
You have to have this label, otherwise you're being rejected from the pearly gates.
Right.
You said God's name wrong. You can't.
That's right. That's right. That's right. And I think also there's a huge biblical theme of like not putting old wine into new skins.
Not
right?
putting old wine into old,
or
putting new wine
into old.
You want to put new wine
into old skins.
You don't want to do that.
You don't want to do that. Right. Okay. Yeah. See. Yeah. We're in seminary. I promise. Anyway. But.
What's the Bible?
Right. I don't think I have a copy of the Bible on me right now. But anyway, the point.
You have a phone.
I do. We have the internet. But what's that theme though? That theme is like taking something that's new and energizing, and then trying to force an old mold onto something that's new.
Yeah.
And I think that that's something that Luke brings up really well. His character brings up really well in this film, is that he's thinking, okay, well, I'm just going to try and restart the Jedi Order, right? Because that worked so well the first time around, right? So he basically makes his temple. He's training students.
The temple was already there. Yeah.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah. And so he's really just trying to redo something that's been done before, and yet it failed, right? Because as Luke discovers, the Jedi Order, at its height of power, could not prevent its own collapse, and could not prevent the corruption of Anakin and Darth Vader and the rise of Darth Sidious, which Luke says.
Well, let's be honest. the Jedi Order as portrayed in the prequels is kind of dogmatic.
Right. They're like the Catholic Church.
Yeah. Well, the Catholic Church, in a sense, there's a similarity in my mind because, their priests can't marry.
They can't marry. They can't have kids.
And honestly, I don't necessarily think that should be a requirement for being a leader in any type of religious faith. But who am I to say?
Right.
Right.
But you have that structure. There's that hierarchy. There's this big organized way of doing things, and yet they end up falling apart, right? And so,
and then some of them, they have to sneak behind everyone's back because they're not allowed certain emotion, like love, towards interpersonal love towards
which seems really odd,
especially if you're recruiting everyone with this power,
right?
And you're like, everyone with this power, they can't marry.
Yes,
they can't.
It's a
they can't even couple up.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And yet you see the way the Force users and Jedi in the original trilogy and then in the sequels, they are totally connected interpersonally together, right? I mean, if you look at it, Luke and Leia, you can see that emotion, you can see that connection, and in the sequels, you can see that connection too. So it's very obvious that at least that part of the Jedi way has been left behind. Right, it really has been. But the thing is that, from what I can tell, Luke tries to reinstitute. We don't know to what extent, but he's tried to reinstitute something that was tried before and it fails. And I think he tries to find out why did it fail. And he discovers by looking at his history that, the Jedi Order itself failed, and so maybe it's time for the Jedi Order to come to an end. Right? Now, what's interesting about that, if you compare that to the dark side in the sequel trilogy, this is interesting because, again, the Sith always had this emphasis that there'd be a master and apprentice relationship, right? This is something that's in the saga. And you could see Kylo Ren really wanting to be the apprentice, right? He's really trying to be the Vader to the Emperor.
Yeah, he wants to be like Vader. Part of his motivation.
Exactly. And so, and that is to essentially adopt this mentality of, I need to be trained by my master, right? Constantly, right? I need to just acknowledge that I'm lesser than this guy, right? And in some ways, Rey kind of wants that too. Rey's saying, I need to be trained by Master Skywalker because, he's the master and I'm not, right? So you've got this motif of an old mold, master-student relationship that's been kind of hammered into us since the prequels, right? From 1 to 6 or 1 to 7. Both those things are extinguished in this trilogy. I mean, Kylo Ren kills Snoke, and Luke really just doesn't really want to train Rey in the way that you would expect him to be trained. He certainly doesn't train her like he was trained by Obi-Wan and Yoda, right? And how Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan and Anakin experienced training. So this old way of doing things, this like you need a teacher, and even Kylo, remember in Force, this just came to my mind just talking to you now. In Force Awakens, when Kylo and Rey are having their lightsaber fight, what does Kylo say to Rey when they're the snow and everything? Kylo says, "You need a teacher. I can teach you the ways of the Force." And then she has that kind of people said it was kind of cheesy, but she kind of goes, "The Force," and closes her eyes, and she's like, "Damn, I'm gonna kick his ass!" Right? Now the thing is,
well, she remembers a key piece of advice in that moment,
which was
something about when it's, I don't know.
Right. But that's
when it's dark, there's light,
right.
Or feel the Force.
Or whatever it is. But the point is though is that he is then trying. So I don't think Kylo Ren really wants to be a student. I don't think he really does. I think he's struggling with I need to be like Vader, but I also don't want to be.
Well, their whole the Sith guise of let's control everything and dominate and hurt everyone. And I'm happy when people are feeling terrible. Especially Snoke actually says that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Which I found kind of surprising.
Right.
Because a lot of the Siths, they don't say that. They don't say, well, I just want the galaxy to suffer.
Right. That's true.
Yeah.
But in a way, both Kylo and Rey's experiences are unconventional in the grand scheme of things, in terms of a Force user being trained.
Well, and my point is so it doesn't really fit the Sith to be an apprentice for very long.
No, it doesn't.
It doesn't. This doesn't make a lot of sense.
Right, and so they're really, and yet if you compare Kylo to Darth Maul was basically I'm going to do whatever my master wants, and Kylo Ren's I'm actually going to kill my master, right? Mm-hmm. Which, so really, they reject the usual way of being trained, and then you've got this idea that maybe the Sith, the Jedi, whatever it is, they don't really necessarily need to be. Those organizations don't really need to exist, and if they don't need to exist, then where does that leave us? Well, it leads us into a place where people will start to pop up as Force sensitive, and maybe don't need to be under this banner of these usual organizations. Maybe they can form something new, right? And this again goes with the Swedenborgian concept of the progression of churches or the progression of ages, right? So things were done in a certain way. Some things that then those things end up coming to an end. Something new is born that might have some familiar connections to the previous organization, but it's actually pretty distinct. And I think that that is represented in the film by, again, the unconventional ways in which the Force users go about being trained in the Force, but also I think it's represented by that kid at the end being Force sensitive, and it's kind of so the slave kid is Force sensitive without any training at all whatsoever. So that's unique. And then the whole Jedi text, I love that. Yoda's I'm just going to burn the sucker down. Right?
Of course, Yoda knows they're not in there.
He probably doesn't, right? He probably doesn't. Yoda himself doesn't actually indicate whether he knows it or not.
He clearly. He knows, right? They weren't in there.
Right. Okay. But
that's how it is.
But isn't that great, though? So the idea of burning those down, because Luke's we just need to burn everything, right, and destroy them.
Well, because actually Yoda makes a kind of a joke in a sense, because he says Rey has all the information with her or whatever.
That's right.
I mean, it seems to mean she already has what she needs to know. He says something like that.
Right.
But
at a time you're kind of
it's adult. It's the dual meaning there. She has all the books.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. and that's something to be said, because if this theme again, it's sort of just because. So there's that major theme of let the past die or burn the past down, right? And it's interesting because both Luke and Kylo have that attitude, right? Luke says the Jedi need to end. Kylo tells Rey, "You just need to burn the past down." So actually, both uncle and nephew are on the same page about this.
Yeah.
It's really interesting. But by the end of the film, you find out that Rey does have the books, like you said. So even though there's this theme of the past needs to go away, we need to shed that old skin. We need to have new wine and new wineskins, right? And yet
it's still wine.
But we can never get away from the past 100%.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Which I think is very Swedenborgian, because we say like we're the new church, at least in our version.
Well, some of us say that.
But but those of us in our branch of the denomination, we're comfortable with saying, we have these fresh ideas, but we're not going to ignore the stuff that comes before us, which I think fits what we see in The Last Jedi. It's like, but I think people have that tension. There's that tension of how much of the past do we hold on to, and how much of a new progression do we go into the future with, right? And I think that tension plays out in our theology. At least that's how I see it. So,
No, those are great thoughts. Yeah, for me, I don't know either. I haven't really thought, like, how would I relate all these things to my own spirituality? I mean, clearly, light, darkness, all that stuff, has a bearing. What I love about, like, Swedenborgianism is that instead of making it about labels, it's about, recognizing, well, not necessarily having to recognize this, but, like, trying to recognize the good qualities in you that are from divinity, and motivating them and empowering them and overcoming your more selfish or material desires. And so clearly that's like painted large across Star Wars. But I don't know how I would relate each detail to my life necessarily. I think what I love about like looking at it as like a symbolic thing about just yourself or someone else or maybe an organization, it's like you can look at all these characters as you. And that, for me, helps to transcend like certain like racial barriers and like gender types things, and then also just gives me a little bit more illumination about my own spirit. Like which part of me could be behaving like this character or in this way, and instead of always othering anything that I don't really want to relate to myself, it's kind of like internalizing, saying like, well, this could be part of me,
right?
And I think recognizing that in general, like running into someone who you may not exactly look up to or is behaving in a way that seems a little despicable to you, and recognizing like that could be me. That could be part of me that maybe is part of me now. And actually a lot of times when we judge people, it's because we're projecting. Right?
Absolutely.
And so I like looking at like any film like that because it's like a mirror to hold up to yourself. And I think it's powerful when you recognize it as such, right?
Yeah. Absolutely, and I think the characters in The Last Jedi, I think there's another thing about The Last Jedi that stood out to me as being unique and different from the other films, is that The Last Jedi kind of makes the playing field in terms of the motivation of the characters or what the characters want, what are their goals. The goals are really similar. Like I said, Luke and Kylo both think the past needs to be burned down and destroyed, and it needs to die off. Right, the Jedi, it's time for the Jedi to end. Kylo says the past needs to be burned down, or I don't think he says burned down, but I think he says the past needs to die. Kill it if you have to, right? Yeah. So for the first time, I think ever in a Star Wars movie, you've got a good guy and a bad guy essentially saying the same thing. Yeah. Now, in terms of like how they're going to go about that, of course, that's different. But it does make you wonder, like, oh, so you can have the same goal. But what makes you different is how you're going to actually operate to achieve that goal.
Well, and why? Like, why do you have that goal?
Exactly.
Yeah.
But at the core, the goal is basically the same, right? And I don't think I've ever seen that in Star Wars. I think the closest thing to projection, right, that is in Empire Strikes Back, when Luke goes down into that dark place on Dagobah, and he's fighting Vader, and then he cuts the head off, and then it explodes, and it's him. So that's sort of a motif of like the shadow self or the projection, right? But really that's about it, And then we come to these sequels, and we're seeing projection, or at least we're seeing like, Luke saying, "Oh, well, he's been corrupted by the dark side, or he's being corrupted by the dark side," meaning Ben Solo. Well, then he has that error of judgment because how does he want to solve that problem? He wants to kill his nephew. So it's kind of like, well, who's being evil then at that point? Is it Ben Solo who Luke can sense is being seduced by the dark side but hasn't actually done anything yet? Or is Luke the bad guy because for a brief moment, for about 30 seconds, he was going to murder his own nephew?
Well, and is it so black and white, right?
Right, I don't think it is.
Yeah.
I don't think it is.
Yeah.
Right?
And so, and he kind of has that realization himself. Like,
Right.
I was really close to going too far
Right.
because of this. But, Ray actually retorts, he's still the one who betrayed you, or at least he murdered like all these other kids.
Yeah,
right?
he did a bad thing.
Yeah. So
very, very simple.
you can, Well, and it does show like the interrelatedness of criminality and striking out and everything, right?
Exactly.
Like, there's something that we learn about in like pastoral care, or classes that have to do with the counseling, with like looking at family systems. And not just looking at families, but looking at groups as like family systems. And instead of labeling one person that as the problem, like looking at it more holistically.
Right.
And that has a lot of benefits, right? And if you look at it that way, you can kind of relate all of that to what we were talking about earlier, and how like our societal constructs can really influence people in terrible ways.
Yeah.
But then we end up blaming them for how they end up behaving. And it is on them what they did, but the name of the game is reformation, healing. It's not punishing all the wrongs being done, because honestly it would never end.
Right. Yeah. Well said.
Yeah, so is there any chance Kylo Ren could be reformed?
Well, I think that's a question. I think that people are of course now hypothesizing, because another big critique of Rian Johnson was, it's kind of like the movie ends and you're like, where's this going to go? Right? It's kind of like we don't really have no idea where this is going to go.
Right, J.J. Abrams taking the helm again, right?
Right, he is, and I think some people are happy about that. And it seems like, I don't know if that's the message. Is redemption, right? Because we saw redemption with Vader.
We did. That's true.
And yet, Kylo, in his quest to be like Vader, is acting unlike Vader. Right, because Vader doesn't kill his master until the very end. Kylo kind of does it prematurely, which shocked the heck out of a lot of people. I thought it was a great story move to kill.
But he still does it to save the person he wants to kind of adopt.
That's true. So maybe he is in a unique way. He's still kind of following those steps.
That's funny.
Yeah.
Because I don't know if he even knew that about Vader. Like, do you think he knew that? He didn't seem to believe that Vader turned on the Emperor.
That's an interesting
impression.
point. And that's something that's really uncertain, because when Rey's talking with Luke, Rey seems to know kind of the whole story. Like, Rey kind of is like, well, but you sense good in him, and Rey's trying to tell Luke, but that's what I'm feeling. I'm feeling that there's still good in Ben Solo, right?
Yeah.
So we should be able to relate on this point, right, Luke? Right? And Luke's like, no, don't do it, man. And kind of acting like Obi-Wan and Yoda, saying, don't go. Well,
yeah. I mean, she definitely put herself in a really vulnerable position, because she could have easily have been murdered.
Sure.
Like, she didn't really have a chance to escape on her own in that situation.
Right. So I don't know. I don't know what the future is going to hold for Kylo Ren, but I do think he's a very intriguing character. I think Adam Driver, who's the actor who's portraying Kylo Ren, is a very great actor. I mean, again, going with a villain that you can kind of feel for. So this is a good comparison with Black Panther. I do think the villain of Black Panther had way more depth, at least on-screen depth, than Kylo Ren has had.
Although I was thinking about this, so Kylo Ren we know more about Kylo Ren than we ever did about Vader in the original trilogy.
True.
You know what I mean?
True.
Like, Kylo Ren has like a deep, philosophical, conversational presence, at least in this newest one.
Right.
Darth Vader never had that many just lines that seem to reveal who he was. I mean, he might have a moment where it looks like he's thinking about what he's doing, and then we read a lot into that moment. Right?
Yeah, that's true. That's true. But come to think of it, the most fundamental thing he really says is, "No, I am your father." And then in Return of the Jedi, he's got a few lines when he's having a pep talk with Luke before he takes him off to the Emperor, right? But that's true. There's not a lot of dialogue that Vader has that's super significant in terms of telling us about who he is, but there's enough dialogue rolling around Kylo Ren where you do get a good sense of who he is and what happened to him, and then having the flashback sequences in The Last Jedi really solidifies that. But really, it's I do say about this film, and why I do think this is why the sequels are definitely better than the prequels, is the acting is better, way better. I mean, Adam Driver.
Dare we say the directing's better?
Yeah, arguably so. I mean, people might critique the story, but the directing, the visual, the acting, I think is really superior.
Well, and let's not leave out one of the key best performances by Daisy Ridley herself. Ray is such an amazing character. And I think people sometimes forget that she was fending for herself, and I know people have talked about this, so I'm not saying I'm the first to get to it, but she was fending for herself for a long time.
Right.
She was already a fighter. So I saw some things where like people were wondering why
she's
she able to fight back.
She's a Mary Sue,
right?
She can just do things.
She just does it. Like, how's that possible?
Right.
But she was actually really badass.
Yeah, she was.
Say it.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Before she,
And she and I do think she's either the same age as Luke when he's in New Hope. It's hard to tell exactly how old she's supposed to be in this trilogy. She's certainly older than Anakin was, obviously. I mean, she's either a late teen or in her early 20s, give or take.
And isn't it horrific? They just left Anakin's mom there to be like slave traded.
Yeah,
and like what?
Yeah.
Well, come on.
Yeah, it's pretty bad. Yeah, but really though, that is something to think about. Is that race?
And then what kind of? Sorry, I'm just. Like,
no, go ahead.
What kind of like order is the Jedi order when they like don't try to squash like slavery? We could easily villainize the Jedis if we really wanted to look at all the things that were going on.
There are people who have done that. Yeah.
Okay.
I certainly have seen problems with the Jedi Order just looking at it objectively, and that's why when I did hear in the trailer Luke say it's time for the Jedi to end, when I heard that I was kind of like, it's about time.
Yeah.
It's
a good thing.
This is a good thing.
Yeah.
No, I think it's there's so much we can pull out from this, and I think it's a good thing that both these films are inspiring so much conversation. I do think it's kind of unfortunate when people get so invested in it that it's going to like start affecting friendships and things like that. But it just shows you how important these things are for people, right? I mean, these living mythologies, like I mentioned earlier, Marvel, Star Wars. These are like the modern legends, and I think we have a tendency to super value these things and really want them to be. And I think that for people in a secular age like we're in right now, these stories are really important for people, and they take them very seriously.
Well, that's why I think it's really beautiful when you can kind of relate these stories to your own progression towards the light. And so you can really get into these stories, but as you talk about them, instead of getting upset, not instead of, but like having it inform. Okay, like what's my motivation here? I'm getting upset with Colin because he's disagreeing with me about this. It's like if you're relating it to like reforming your own motivations and heart, then there's like some part of you that's like, okay, so this relationship, these relationships, this whole thing is more important than my opinion about this.
Absolutely.
Right. Yeah.
I think those are some potentially some nice closing words, perhaps, for this episode.
Well, this is nice, like a little riffing. I think. Like future episodes, we'll have some guests on that can help break our Transcendiots a little more.
Absolutely.
This was cool.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
Very good. All right. Well, until next time then.
Until next time.
Cool.
Bye.
Bye.